Look at this skyline. Glossy, futuristic, and hyper-efficient. It reflects a state that manages its territory with the precision of a high-end corporate enterprise. When you zoom out, the nation practically disappears, a tiny island of 734 square kilometers, with no oil, timber, or fresh water. Yet comparing 2025 GDP per capita against Western powerhouses, Singapore reached nearly $99,000, placing it ahead of almost every major economy. This wealth was engineered. How a swampy, post-colonial trading post with no domestic market survived its own birth is the starting point for the Singaporean miracle. In the 1950s, the island was an impoverished colonial enclave. Unemployment sat above 10%, disease was rampant in crowded settlements, and the city faced housing shortages. On August 9, 1965, the country faced an existential crisis. Singapore was abruptly expelled from the Federation of Malaysia, cast adrift as an independent state that few expected to survive. They were a nation with no hinterland, no standing military, and no guaranteed source of drinking water. Every basic requirement for survival had to be imported from potentially hostile neighbors. Modern Singapore was born in a state of absolute crisis. This wealth was a mandatory blueprint, engineered to prevent a total national collapse. Stripped of conventional resources, the state had one lucky asset: geography. The island sits at the narrowest point of the Strait of Malacca. Over a quarter of all global seaborne trade and a third of all crude oil must pass through this corridor. It is the shortest route connecting Europe and the Middle East to the markets of East Asia. They monetize this bottleneck through a transshipment model, acting as a distribution exchange for smaller regional ports across Indonesia and Vietnam that cannot handle ultra-large vessels. Today, this infrastructure handles over 37 million container units a year. It is a highly automated industrial machine that operates 24 hours a day right beneath the financial district. World Integrated Trade Solution data highlights the scale of this trade engine. Singapore's trade-to-GDP ratio consistently exceeds 300%, meaning the value of goods passing through the island is triple the nation's total economic output. By turning a geographic choke point into a frictionless valve for global trade, they secured the foundational cash flow needed for national expansion. The government used that capital to attract foreign corporations, building the domestic industries they could not afford to start themselves. Through the Economic Development Board, the country adopted a model of pragmatic state capitalism. The government acted as a proactive dealmaker rather than a traditional bureaucracy. EDB officials pitched global CEOs directly, promising guaranteed infrastructure, tax holidays, and zero labor strikes in exchange for establishing factories on the island. In a historically volatile region, they offered an English common law framework, strict contract enforcement, and a zero-tolerance policy for corruption. This environment attracted over 7,000 multinational corporations, with thousands choosing the island as their primary Asia-Pacific headquarters. Singapore engineered an oasis of predictability. For global capital, operating here removed the risks usually associated with expansion into emerging markets. By the 1970s, cheaper labor in neighboring countries threatened to hollow out the island's early assembly model. Low-wage competition was a threat to their survival. The state repurposed education as a critical economic infrastructure asset. Schools were redesigned to feed the specific technical needs of high-tech multinational corporations. Their students now lead the global PISA rankings in math and science, while state-funded programs like SkillsFuture provide every adult with the means to retrain in AI and robotics. A common misconception is that this economy survives solely on private banking and wealth management for the global elite. Manufacturing remains the hidden engine, accounting for nearly a quarter of the GDP. The island produces 11% of the world's semiconductor equipment and 20% of all global microchips. By pairing a technical workforce with high-margin physical production, Singapore successfully escaped the middle-income trap that stalls most developing nations. As the nation moves into quantum computing and AI, their physical limit, their tiny size, functions as a structural advantage. The entire nation operates under a single, unified tier of government. There are no state disputes or competing regional jurisdictions to slow down planning. This unified grid allows complex policy and transit infrastructure to move from ministry to nationwide implementation in a fraction of the time required by massive federal nations. But this level of engineered perfection comes with a severe domestic cost. This line graph maps the collapse of the fertility rate, which dropped to 0.97 in recent years. High living costs and intense workplace pressure are now highlighted by the World Bank as central threats to the economy. The very mechanisms of competition that drove the economic miracle are now threatening the nation's long-term societal sustainability. We started with a paradox: how a tiny, resource-barren island became one of the wealthiest financial and industrial capitals on Earth. The answer is not found in luck. Singapore became rich by engineering every square kilometer and human mind to its functional limit.